Welcome to The Explainer. I'm so thrilled you're here with us today because we are looking at a story of absolute sheer survival. We're going to be exploring the incredible and often wild history of Albania. This is a nation that has faced constant, literally existential threats to its identity for thousands of years, yet somehow it just continues to emerge unbroken. If you've ever wondered how a national identity can actually withstand the crushing weight of collapsing empires, world wars, and total isolation, well, you are definitely in the right place. Okay, let's dive into this. How exactly did Europe's most isolated territory survive sprawling empires, ruthless dictators, and chaotic anarchy to become the modern global ally it is today? The dramatic scale of Albania's survival story is just unparalleled. We're talking about a region that was constantly right in the crosshairs of history's absolute greatest powers. So to make sense of all this, here's our roadmap for today. We'll travel chronologically through 5 main eras. First, ancient roots and empires. Second, Skanderbeg and Ottoman rule. Third, independence and world wars. Fourth, the communist isolation. And finally, the transition to modern democracy. Let's jump right in. Starting off with Section 1, Ancient Roots and Empires, the dawn of a resilient identity. To really grasp the Albanian spirit, we have to zoom way out to antiquity, long before any modern borders existed. The ancient ancestors of the Albanians were the Illyrians. Now, they weren't a single unified state. Actually, it was more like a fragmented union of these fiercely independent mountain tribes. But what they lacked in a central governing power, they totally made up for in sheer tenacity. When foreign invaders came knocking, these tribes would unite to fiercely defend their customs, their beliefs, and their lands. And it's that deep-seated independence that laid the permanent groundwork for the Albanian identity we still see today. And this brilliantly illustrates what happened when that independence collided with a massive cultural shift. The Roman Empire conquered the region in the 3rd century BC. And they didn't just conquer, they assimilated and built. Look at this number, 20,000 spectators. That was the capacity of the massive Roman amphitheater built in the Illyrian port city of Dyrrhachium, which is modern-day Durrës. To put that in perspective, that's like a modern sports arena. It shows how a land of mountain tribes was rapidly transformed into this major hub of Roman and Greek culture, trade, and huge architectural engineering. Moving on to Section 2, Skanderbeg and Ottoman rule, where the pendulum really swings. As we transition into the medieval period, the story of Albania becomes one of legendary resistance. You simply cannot talk about Albanian history without talking about the year 1444 and George Kastrioti, who is universally known as Skanderbeg. Raised in the Turkish court but ultimately returning to his roots, Skanderbeg managed to unite the fragmented Albanian lords into the Albanian League. Using brilliant, completely out-of-the-box military strategy, he fiercely defended the homeland against the massive encroaching Ottoman Empire for 23 straight years. He became the ultimate symbol of survival, a small unified force holding back one of the greatest empires on the planet at the time. Now, after Skanderbeg's death, the Ottomans did eventually take control, and that sparked a profound transformation. Pre-Ottoman Christian strongholds, like the spectacular city of Drogostra, were transformed over centuries. The Ottomans introduced their administrative systems and Muslim architecture right alongside the existing Christian structures, and this created a highly complex, deeply blended religious identity. What's super fascinating here is that unlike other regions that were completely torn apart by this kind of change, the Albanian people eventually developed a unique secular tolerance, a real habit of continual moderation where their national identity completely transcended religious division. Which brings us to Section 3, Independence and World Wars, a massive struggle for sovereignty. Entering the modern era, the Albanian dream of a unified nation clashed violently with global conflicts. Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds, because it was pure historical whiplash. In 1912, Albania finally declares independence from the Ottoman Empire. Incredible, right? But just 2 years later, in 1914, World War I breaks out, and the country is invaded by multiple foreign powers. Fast forward to 1925, they manage to proclaim a republic, which soon turns into a monarchy, only to be completely occupied by Italian fascist forces in 1939. It's just a brutal, constant cycle of claiming sovereignty and then having it ripped away by larger global powers. I want to pause here for a second and just let the emotional peak of the 1912 Declaration of Independence really resonate. Ismail Kemali declared, quote, "It proclaims in front of the Albanian people, the Balkans, and the whole world the full independence of Albania, now and forever." This was a monumental triumph for the Albanian national awakening movement. Despite all the intense chaos that followed, this declaration was the anchor. It was the exact moment Albania finally stepped onto the world stage as a distinct independent nation. All right, Section 4, the communist isolation. Basically, surviving the void. Following the sheer devastation of World War II, Albania entered a very dark period where the heavily centralized regime of Enver Hoxha completely severed the country from the outside world. We have to draw a really stark contrast here. Remember that historical tolerance and blended heritage we talked about earlier? Well, the Hoxha communist regime sought to completely erase it. They didn't just close the borders to capitalist countries, they violently rejected any foreign influence. The regime literally demolished historical monuments, destroyed churches and mosques, and even banned foreign literature from writers like Shakespeare and Goethe. The goal was total ideological purity through absolute suffocating isolation. So the crucial point is the staggering human cost of this regime. Documented statistics from just a tiny 3-year window, 1946 to 1949, showed 221 citizens killed by executive order. Hundreds were condemned to prison. Thousands were detained. The state seized absolute 100% control of every bank, mine, and enterprise. The country was plunged into this grim poverty, with a perennially bankrupt regime systematically purging absolutely any real or imagined opposition. Finally, Section 5, Transition to Modern Democracy, a period of absolute chaos and eventual rebirth. The sudden, chaotic collapse of the communist regime resulted in some extreme economic whiplash for the Albanian people. Imagine waking up and moving overnight from a tightly centralized, state-planned economy to the absolute free market chaos of the 1990s. The regime had left behind ruined industries, enormous accumulated debts, and a workforce entirely unprepared for global capitalism. It really forces us to ask, what actually happens when an isolated regime just collapses overnight? When there's no transition period, no gradual easing in, just an immediate, volatile vacuum of power, laws, and institutions? Well, the answer is a fast-paced descent into chaos. In 1990, brave student protests forced the communist regime's resignation. But the reality they inherited was pretty bleak, ruined companies trying to operate with 60-year-old machinery. Then, in 1997, the newly liberalized economy suffered a devastating collapse due to massive pyramid schemes. People lost everything. This sparked a nationwide revolt and a descent into sheer anarchy that literally required international armed intervention to restore order. Now, what is truly interesting about this timeline is the rapid bounce back. Despite the intense chaos of the 90s, Albania pushed through democratic elections, enacted hundreds of privatization laws, and aggressively pursued Euro-Atlantic integration. By 2008, they were in NATO accession talks, and by 2009, Albania became a full NATO member. It is an astonishing leap from Europe's most isolated, impoverished state to a vital regional partner sitting right at the table with the world's greatest powers. We've covered thousands of years of history today, and I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. What lessons can the rest of the world learn from a nation that survived millennia of attempts to erase its very identity? Albania's story really teaches us that political systems can collapse and borders will definitely shift, but a deeply rooted cultural identity is incredibly hard to extinguish. It's a fascinating case study in geopolitics, survival, and rebirth. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope it sparks your curiosity to dive even deeper into the rich, complex history of the Balkans.